Are the slides ready? There are many questions as to the truthfulness of the report on the dating test. Is this reliable or not? I saw and read a number of different things. For instance, the pollution issue. Everything can be stated, but for instance, as far as pollution is concerned, in order to have a mistake by 13 centuries, more pollutant will be necessary than linen. But today I was convinced on the basis of mathematical evidence that at least the report on dating is not serious. They have been pulling our leg. So first of all, it's an official report. It has been written and signed by 21 scientists who claim to be to work for different laboratories and for the British Museum. So it's an official responsibility. So first point, first slide, please. First issue, they said we cut the sample from a strip of 10 millimeters by 70, which had been removed in order to obtain 3 samples of 50 milligrams each. Okay. This was then repeated by Professor Ricci, who had cut the cloth himself, so he must have been quite sure of what he had done. And no report in Paris, and I was given the report in Paris by Professor Marinelli, and in his report he states we cut one piece of 1 centimeter by 7, and then we cut this in half, and one of these halves has been cut into 3 pieces. And that's okay. So, what are the documents, the undisputable documents in our hands? First of all, we have photographs of the piece of Shroud which was cut. This is the photo. This is the version by nature. This is the version by Ricci. 300 cut into half, and one of the halves has been cut into 3 pieces, and 50 milligrams. You will immediately see that these 50 milligram samples are very small. They are exactly half as much as stated by nature. But surely we have this photo, which has been published both by Ricci, by Professor Ricci and Professor
Ed è una fotografia che include 1 centimetro.
And it is a photograph including a meter, and this refers both to the cloth and to the cutting. Another undisputable evidence we have is the fact that the 300 milligrams quoted by Professor Ricci were recorded in film evidence about the cutting of the samples, which has been broadcast by Italian television. So there was a frame showing a precision scale showing 300 milligrams. Third, the piece was cut into half. If there were 300 milligrams and we had 350 milligrams cutting, of course these 300 milligrams should have been cut into half in order to have these values, and this is stated by 3 different persons. So we have 3 sure elements, but we are at a loss as to the size of 7 by 1 centimeter, 70 by 10. One of the reports delivered in the Paris symposium had been delivered by Professor Testore. He does not mention any size, but only weight values. He had weighted all the samples, so he refers to the exact weights of the samples. When I read this report, I immediately realized that the 3 weight values stated by him, when added up, give a weight which is higher than the original sample. And I asked myself, how come this value? Because we cannot create matter. Here we have the first version on the right, where he says we had 300 milligram samples divided into half, 154.9, 148.8. The first was cut 52, 52, and 3, and 53.7. When we add up all this, we have 158.5. So, how can we have 158 hereby, including the loose thread which remain when cutting? Obviously, something must be wrong. Professor Testore wrote me after a few days, and he also wrote to Monsieur de Conte, the secretary of to Bonnet. We had an almost daily contact in that period. He wrote me telling I was wrong, I apologize, and he sent me a new report. In this new report, in this new sheet, he told us that the piece cut was not the 154.9, but the 145.8, and 3 samples had been obtained, and the third one, since it was too small, had been supplemented with a small piece of cloth taken from the first sample. So this story tells us that 2 samples were, so to speak, monolithic. The third was in 2 parts. It has to be noticed that both Professor Ricci and Professor Testore in their reports showed a certain pleasure in stressing that thanks to the chance or ability, the samples were 3, they were equal to each other and almost the same in weight, whereas the third sample was quite different from the other 2. Bonnet Marto, acknowledging the chaos which had been created, and since the samples cut according to Ricci were just half of the other, so the cloth should have weighted twice as much as the cloth of the Shroud. So Bonnet goes to visit the third labs, and quite strange things arise, apart from what he saw in Taxon, which I'm going to refer in a few minutes. From Zurich, he received a photograph of the sample, which says it received. So it has to be noted that the statement by Zurich says it received the sample, not that it tested it. This is Z1, this is the code attributed to that sample, and quite peculiar on the background on the photography we have a millimeter scale. which gives us the size of the piece. And since the specific weight of the sinden are known, this is a piece weighing 50 milligrams, which is okay. So everything tells us that this is a photograph, is really a photograph of the piece received in Zurich. Oxford also sends a photograph without reference measurements, but since the weaving pattern tells us that it can be comparable with the Zurich one, so given the dimensions and the photographs, it was not difficult to recompose the pattern according to the real cutting procedure of the sample. So here we have the Oxford, the Zurich, the Taxon sample that I mentioned, the little piece which had been added up, and the discarded piece of which should have been left in Turin because it is the rim element which was uncertain as to its belonging. So now a crucial thing must be stated. The cutting was not 7 by 1 centimeter, but it was 1.7 by 3.61. Now, if we juxtapose these pieces, then I wonder why on the Nature report a size was indicated which had nothing to do with the real dimensions. Why did they bother to tell us false things? They just changed everything. So up to now, we quoted undisputable facts and data. Now on this point, perhaps question marks begin to arise. First of all, about the Nature, we would wonder 350 milligram samples, so why should we ever mention sizes if they are quite difficult to check on a cloth sample? Why did they ever mention the 10 by 70 value? I do have an answer, but I'm not going to share it with you in this moment. It's just an assumption. Then 10 by 70 was just a guideline. This was said at a certain point in time. The British Museum had said, I'm going to cut 10 by 70 and you do the same. So how come Mr. Rigi, who performed the cutting, and he very well knew that he had been unable to comply with the instruction by the British Museum, why did he put false measurements on his report? And I wonder, why did Mr. Tite, who was there looking at the cutting, why, when he saw that the cutting was not complying with his instruction, why did he write a wrong datum on the report? These are the questions I myself ask, and which I consider together with quite peculiar coincidences. For instance, the fact that, as you very well know, in the labs, the representatives of the Shroud ownership were not admitted. There were quite strange characters, such as the Reverend Sachs in Zurich, or the people from Rochester in Taxon. The fact that the three labs which were supposed to work independently from one another, worked according to a given timetable. The second began when the first had just finished, and the third began when the second had just finished. The fact that all the samples were opened and taken out of the cases at the presence of these persons, and there was a claim that the Oxford sample was not unsealed in the presence of the right person. In Taxon, the samples were opened on Sunday morning in the presence of very few persons, and in the third lab, the report had to be signed without the signer's margin, that is the plus or minus, which was attributed. The chi-square test was determined according to what Warden Wilson stated in the report. Warden Wilson, as far as I understand, said that when different dates from different labs have to be assembled, then we should resort to standard procedure as defined by I have a bit of amnesia at this point, the speaker says. Anyway, we have this chi-square evidence, this chi-square test. Well, already in Paris, a question mark had arisen. A reservation had been stated, which was left unanswered. Denmark, in his writing, had told that an error had been made, and nobody answered this mark. I have a statistics book at home. I studied it, and first of all, I found values between chi-square and significance level, that is the probability index, which is the one which Mr. Warden Wilson wanted to establish, and I also found a sort of formula I can now state that the significance level is equal to E to minus chi-squared divided by 2. It just looks complicated, but any portable computer can do it immediately and error-free. Let's see whether it stands to truth. As to chi-square, the values in Pearson table by 2 degrees of freedom, that is working on 3 values, 0 to 1, 1. Here the table shows 90, and my formula gives me 89.986 by 1, 3 of 6, 50, 0, 0, 2.4, 0, 8, 30, 29.9, so we do have a consistency. So quite surely my formula is perhaps approximated, but the values are fully reliable. Now let's go and see what the Nature report states. This is the photocopy of the Nature report. It's a coincidence that they have a range of 4 values of chi-square 0, 1, and they obtain 90. They could have obtained 95, but this means that there's very high probability that this scatter is due to chance, random factors. Then we have for chi square 0.3, 50-50, and that's right. For 0.4, they indicate 30, and that's right. But as to the value of the shroud, the one we are interested in, here we have chi square 6.4, and if we divide it in half, it's a 3.2. And if we have it to 3.2, we have 4.07, and they print 5 after stating that they were doubtful as to being in the limit, that they were afraid they were not in the validity range. They now suddenly change the last datum, the right one, in the most obscene matter. So let's forget that 5 is the minimum limit for the reliability of the test. If you, Mr. Todd, forged the report by writing 5 instead of 4, and this is arithmetic, it's my home computer tells it, if you change 4 into 5, this means that you needed, it had to be 5. You run the risk of making a sorry figure, cutting a sorry figure, just like you are doing now. So I run in a report where we have 3 different points at the beginning, halfway, and at the end. If in this report I'm not saying these are errors, these are fake values, fake data, then this report should be thrown away, in my opinion. My computer has an image of a waste paper basket. If I want to throw away something, the computer asks me, do you want really to erase this, to cancel this? I say yes, and then I would like the carbon-14 dating to disappear from our minds because it was an obscene fact, an obscene event.